Hi guys, Mods here, and welcome to the third and final part of my ranking champions that I don't like to see across from me in the draft, or even on my team sometimes. And in this video we reach the top, the power level 9000! Grown, get me out of here, hardcore bully champions. As I've said before in the previous installments, this is really just a bit of fun. There really is no champion I genuinely don't like facing, apart from maybe my top one. Because every time you face a champion you find gives you a hard time is just an opportunity to learn to beat them. Additionally, these are just my opinions, based on my experiences and the way I play, yada yada yada. Making this final category was actually pretty hard, as I found going into the upper echelons, narrowing down to the top champions that I find problematic. It started to get a bit hard to really distinguish between them, but I forced myself to limit it to a top 10. Oh, and in case I forgot to mention it, or in case it's not clear, this is geared towards a low elo perspective, because that's where I play, between bronze and silver, a little bit of gold. Couldn't possibly comment on what the game's like when played by those big shots, who actually vaguely know what they're doing. So let's get into it. Psych! Okay, so since I started doing this video series, a few more champions have come out. It's taken me a while, so I'm going to have a crack at retroactively placing them within my tier list. First up, we have the Enchanter support, Renata Glasque, and she is going in my Disrespect tier. Renata is an Enchanter that indexes more into buffing the attack speed and damage of her teammates, rather than the more conventional, sustain, healing oriented playstyle of many of the others. She does provide shields and peeling through her ability to displace opponents and get them to fight each other with her ult. And she has a conditional revive on one of her basic abilities that further allows her to increase the durability of her companions. I basically see her as like a fight turner, where the enemy might think or actually be in a position of slightly greater strength, but she'll turn it on them, as in they'll be grouped up together in a good formation, but she'll use her ult that they then can't escape because it's the size of a lane, or they're in a bottleneck, and then they all turn on each other and massively damage each other, especially if they've got strong auto-attacking champions building crit. Or maybe the enemy might commit for a pick that's, would be really important if they got it, but then she'll put her I think it's her W on them. They won't die quite as quickly as anticipated, and maybe that gets turned around and then they live. In high elos, I gather Renata is actually pretty strong, but she has some key characteristics that just don't lend themselves to low elo. For one thing, she's quite, she takes a bit of skill to play. She relies on using several skill shot abilities, most of which have long cooldowns, so not generally good for people that struggle to hit those. Probably most importantly, she is both squishy and immobile, which means she has to position well or get caught out and picked off, which isn't that hard to do, and people will be focusing her because she has a very important R for team fights that you want to take out as a priority. Ultimately, most of the Renatas I face or have been on my team just seem to be trash. It's people playing a champion just to try to get a feel for her is what it comes across as. There's certainly never a real concern, and I can't think of a single one that's impressed me. Even when she was first released, and new champions tend to be massively overtuned. So yeah, she would be near the lower end of my Disrespect tier. Let's move on to Neela, the most recent released champion from Riot. I'm going to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what class she's supposed to be. It's like a really short-range marksman, or probably more accurately described as a long auto-attack range assassin. And I'm going to stick her in my fair, aka average tier, which possibly might be a bit of a surprise, but I'm trying to future-proof my video. And here's my reasoning. On release, she was pretty overpowered, I felt. The ones I faced were pretty monstrous. And she's been steadily nerfed since. And honestly, she still feels really, really quite strong. Probably strong enough that I would actually put her currently in the Remember the Name category, my next tier up. But I just don't think that power level is going to be sustained over the long term. To conceptualize her playstyle and her kit, she's basically a carbon copy of Samira. Yes, there are clearly subtle differences, and those differences will become more noticeable at higher levels of play, but, in my neck of the elo, generalised, simplistic concepts are really all that matter. And what it boils down to is that Neela is a short-ranged, snowballing ADC. Due to her short range, she's vulnerable to getting bullied and poked early in lane, and therefore the enemy gets ahead, and then she finds it harder and harder to get into the game without jungle help or setting up some sort of clever play. Or with a bit of skill of patience or jungle attention, crafting a situation in which she can get a favourable all-in, she will ruffle stomp the lane. So yeah, just like Samira, her Q gives her a bit of extended range to poke and get those last hits. Her W protects her from all kinds of abilities, and she's able to share it with friendlies. And she's got dashes that dash to enemies, and I think maybe to friendlies as well. I can't quite remember. It's a double dash anyway. And the ult is a big area of effect damage team fighting ability. A bit like Samira's, probably more like Diana's, although it's a bit larger than Diana's. A clear advantage she has over Samira is her passive ability to get more experience for her and her other laner, which I think is absolutely bonkers. I don't understand how that ability is going to fit in the game long term. Be interesting to see how they manage to balance that. And what was the other one? Oh yes, and the fact she synergizes much better with enchanters because she augments healing and shielding than Samira does. So she can play with all-in supports and enchanted supports, whereas Samira sort of doesn't synergize so well with supports that just hang back and masturbate on the tower whilst they watch her work. So yeah, basically she's much more forgiving in that if she's losing, and you expect maybe the shorter range to fall behind slightly more. All things else being equal, but she's getting more experience, so there's not such a big experience gap building up, so she's kind of staying level even despite losing. And the flip side is if she starts to get the advantage, then it's going to snowball really, really hard. And yeah, I really don't think Riot is going to have a good time with the design debt they've created for themselves. And I would not be surprised if eventually they remove the experience bonus thing, because it doesn't really fit a theme. You can say, oh look, the joy of getting extra experience is bullshit. You can see how they could balance it for her, right? Like, okay, you expect her to be on average, slightly over-leveled versus where, a character would be expected to be. So you can sort of like tone down the incremental or kind of level by level bonus stats, right? To just sort of account for that, to like force her to overachieve in order to kind of be at a particular level. But you're not going to do that for all the other potential champions that she could lane with, right? So yeah, currently probably a bit too strong still, and definitely further up the tier list than I'm necessarily placing her here. But long term, I think she'll hang around with Samira, be decent but manageable, as long as you buy Grievous Wounds and bait out her W. Last of the new champs I have to talk about is bel'veth. In absolutely every game on release and absolutely overtuned. And I totally get and understand why Riot does that, by the way. It really is probably the best way to create hype for a new product and get something out there, get it played, so that it can then they can then work out how to best fit it into a balanced game. Yeah, so after the initial frenzy of activity, things have calmed down a bit, and I don't see her that much anymore, although she does still pull out some bans. I gather there were some significant nerfs, and that probably has a lot to do with it. And even though I'm not really that concerned when I see her currently, I think long term she probably deserves a spot in my dangerous remember the name category. And that's because her kit has a number of things that really lend themselves to low elo, contrary to like what we were talking about with Renata Glasque. So what is she? She's an AP fighter jungler. First off, I'd argue that fighters are probably the simplest, or at least most intuitive class in the game. The class is almost defined by the fact that they bring a good balance of mobility, damage, and durability, which overall translates as a bit more forgiveness towards errors. Maybe that's just the way I see things. In any case, the mechanics are definitely within the scope of being used effectively in low elo. Doing magic damage is also quite nice because in low elo people like to play the cool AD assassins and brawlers in the mid lane, and so being able to get some magic damage on your team via the jungle is often quite nice to have. But the big thing is that she's a hyper-scaling character that doesn't have that horrible an early game. So yes, let's be clear, she is a weak early game jungler. right? Like, so her weakness is that if she gets invaded early and put behind, then she's going to struggle to get into the game. And that tends to snowball. It delays her impact in helping her laners out, which means her laners tend to fall further behind, which means they then can't protect her jungle, so she falls further behind, they get less objectives, you know. This is the problem of, or the weakness of farming junglers. But the flip side is that she has some of the strongest scaling in the game, and if as a farming jungler, your idea, your kind of plan, is to sacrifice your team, you know, they're there to support you, you're going to come out the jungler at like 25 minutes and be this unstoppable force that carries the game, and they've just got to shut up and hang on until you do that. And she absolutely does have the tools to make that reality, and in low elo, you know, the games drag. People don't punish early or kind of use their leads well enough to then close out games, and so she will get the chance more often than not to get into the game. Interrupting bel'veth's first clear is important, but she's quite happy to start leashless and can even start on raptors, you know, so she's got a flexible and defendable first clear path. Her multiple AoE effect abilities give her a fast clear in general, and that only gets faster as she gets more and more passive attack speed. Basically, she gets stacks from every time she kills a large monster like Gromp or a buff or a cannon. Augment her transformation to her true form where she gets even more powerful, and I think champion takedowns as well do something like that. Look it up for the details. The Q is like a multiple direction dash, so she can dash 4 times, each in a different direction. The directions come back off cooldown, and she can reset a direction when she hits her W, which is a knock up, so she's got like a range CC, like the Kayn Scythe ability. And between those two abilities, you know, she's not great at ganking, but she's got a gap close and she's got CC, so it's not terrible. So while she probably would rather just keep farming rather than forcing things, she totally can gank early and impact the map. It's important to note that her base ability Qs do not go over walls, but in her true form, which she gets from killing things like Baron or from killing champions, then she can go over walls, so her ganking angles can sort of change depending on whether she's level 6 and has killed something recently, basically. But yes, early on she is on the weaker side, but she's still not too bad at dueling at like almost any point, because she's got her mobility, which allows her to kind of move out of the way of potential skill shots or effects. And her E is like a big circle. It's basically like an Aurelia. She blocks a ton of damage. I think it's like a 70% damage reduction. It's something crazy, and does loads of auto attacks against the lowest health target near her, which heals her a bunch. So it's a little bit of a gotcha. She's not bad in team fights either, like especially with her true form. She's, you know, then she's got a bit more of the chunk to withstand the fight, and you know, her range, her abilities have a decent enough range that she doesn't have to literally be in the front line. She can like be in the second wave, or at least have a little bit of space between her and danger. And broadly, the intent is to play something like Viego, in that you want to clean up the fight. You know, with you know, once someone goes down, then you get your R ability, which does a massive burst of damage to everyone. I think it's true damage, heals you a bunch, gets you in like a form, so it means it gets you into your true form, so you get even bigger and harder to beat, and then you just keep like resetting off this damn thing. I think that the reset also makes you slightly intargetable, which, oh my goodness, frustrates me with Viego. And it permanently increases her stats. The last thing to mention is her pushing power when she's got the Baron buff. So if she's taken the Baron and like taken whatever that little shitty coral thing it is that allows her to get her true form off it, then whenever she's around minions, her side or the enemy's side, doesn't matter, if they die, they turn into these little fish things, which are basically minions, and so she can push massive waves as a sort of game-ending steroid. And in low elo, games go on long enough that Baron takes are very achievable. The flip side, I guess, is that people don't fucking do it. But given bel'veth can solo the damn thing at like 3 items, yeah, she's definitely one of the best champions at closing out a late game. So for all those reasons, I think that bel'veth will be a jungler that us low elos will consistently, over time, be forced to respect. So finally, we make it to my top 10. The Dunk Masters, the ones you see on the enemy team and you just Sigh internally. I almost feel a bit apologetic because there's not really any of these that I think should massively surprise anybody. So whilst chances are you probably don't agree exactly, I don't think any of these should be too controversial. So at the rear of the pack, if you can make him out behind that tier maker logo, is Set. Set has been a overtuned low elo problem since release basically. And although we are a long way from those initial days, and he is actually much more balanced now, and rarely seen outside of top lane, whereas before, I mean, he could be literally every role. He's still a bully that just won't quite go away. And it's not like he's actually badly designed, I think he's quite well designed. He's got obvious counterplay, like he struggles to gap close, so you kite him out. He really wants you to fight him up close. But his most important ability, that Falcon Punch that gives him a shield that's the size of his health bar and helps him recover his health really quickly, that's really telegraphed. But telegraphed or not, game in, game out in low elo, he's going to land it. I still struggle to dodge it, even though I know it's coming. Set's super strong laning phase means he can beat almost anybody and get a lead on his own. So the frees up his jungler to go and pressure other sides of the map. If you go and try to take him on, he can happily 1v2. And then he'll just start patrolling the river, maybe taking a few of your camps. He's not the best at that, but he'll still do it. Just generally making moving around in topside a real pain. He does fall off in the late game where he starts to struggle to get and engage before taking too much damage. But he retains his power for longer than you think, given how strong his early game is. And while some early game champions like, say, Renekton, rely on their, using their strength to really crush that lane, otherwise they're in big trouble. A Set that's lost his lane or has fallen behind will happily still 1v2 any other, a non-top laner who comes to face him in a side lane. So even though he's early game oriented, even though he suffers from low range, even though half the time he messes up his ult and brings himself into the middle of the enemy team to be killed, or just in other ways messes up, he just takes up so much space for the majority of an average game. And everything we can say about Set that makes him oppressive we can apply to Darius, but it's just slightly worse. Darius, of course, needs no introduction as a premier dunk master. Low elo and high elo, it doesn't matter. People still fear and ban this champion. And again, it's not like there's no counterplay. It's not like he's... I was going to say it's not like he's overpowered. Let's just say his kit is extremely close to the core concept of what a top laner seems generally intended to be. He's thick, fast, and puts out a ton of damage in a wide area around himself. Yes, you can kite him. Yes, you can dodge his arrest. Yes, you can dodge that outer axe blade. But I know you've all tried it, and I know that you know that it's really not very forgiving. You make one mistake and he wins. If he's left to his own devices and he's not against someone competently playing a counter range champion, then the Darius player will usually win his lane. As a jungler or mid, if you go up and try to shut him down, there's a decent chance he'll 1v2 you. Don't tell me your heart doesn't start to beat just a little bit faster when you're heading towards a snowballing Darius. And then yes, like Set, as we get to the later stages of the game, he starts to struggle a bit more to get into grips with the enemy, but when he does, oh boy, it's pentakill time. That true damage dealing, resetting ult, I imagine is burned into the memory of all of us from our earliest days on the Rift. And he is the champion fourth most likely to get a pentakill in the game, and has been up at the very top, I think, I'm betting, since his inception. So despite the terror and trauma Darius and Set are responsible for, they only take the 10th and 9th places on this list, and that is pretty much solely because they are obligatory top laners. I know Darius can jungle, because Riot want new players to be able to kind of access that role through a champion that they start playing. And Set can moonlight as a support, but really top lane is where their power is and where you mostly see them, and top lane just has the least impact of all the roles on the map. Of all the roles, a snowballing, super fed top laner will take the longest to make their presence felt across the rest of the Rift, and the other team has the most time to try to find a way to overcome the deficit. They can play both ADC and top into suitable matchups, and those matchups tend to include the juggernauts that dominate low elo. Vayne is basically Kayle that comes online earlier, at least in top lane, And in bot lane, she can go toe-to-toe with any late-game ADC and be happy that she won't be outscaled, and has options to use her moderate mobility in CC if she's good enough at positioning to overcome her short range and outplay her lane opponents and get herself accelerated. She can sit back and scale with enchanters, or she can go more aggressive with engaged supports. Once she's hit her power spikes, a competent Vayne is a monster. She'll team fight, just putting out a constant hail of shots that just like 1, 2, 3 shred, you're dead, and can happily 1v1 solo laners in a side lane. Incidentally, she is currently the champion 5th most likely to get a pentakill. Honestly, most Vaynes aren't that good because by definition, low elo players aren't that good. And although she's a bit of a Tryndamere when it comes to button pressing, the positioning required to play her effectively does take some skill. So whilst chances are your average Vayne isn't really gonna cause more problems than any other good ADC for most of the game, when I see her locked in, there's always that little worry that what if she's good enough? So top lane, least impactful role. ADC, arguably second least impactful role. Matters more whether you're what you're not doing, i.e. dying on repeat, rather than what you are doing. So above those we have champions that fill the other roles. And here we have Blitzcrank. And why he's here is not at all a mystery. It's for his one ability, his grab. All the others, I don't even know what some of the others abilities he has, because all anyone cares about is the grab. He's got a knockup. Knockups are great CC, they don't get reduced by tenacity, they help set up your Yasuo's. I think his lightning field, I think that's his ult, is probably more detrimental to his ADC than helpful. He seems to have the ability to run really fast briefly to help set up his grab. And he's fairly grab chunky and low economy grab, which can help him survive and grab. Basically, he's not flashy and he doesn't really do as much as many other more modern supports, but what he does do, which is grab, is he reigns supreme. Its range, its speed, its non-committal nature makes it game winning. Few other abilities in the game shape the game and the way it has to be played like Blitzcrank's grab. From the very word go of the game, before minions have spawned, before the announcer has warmed up her voice to say, "An enemy is dominating," Blitzcrank and his chums will be running directly out of base towards the bot side, enemy buff looking to get a pick. The number of people that don't know he's going to do this in low elo is truly outstanding, because the number should be 0 and is something like 80%. Blitzcrank's in the game and still half your team will be in the fountain or in a bush, somewhere in the river picking their nose or remote dancing and not paying attention with their hands off their controls. Sitting ducks for first blood, and it's sort of okay because half of his team will also be doing the same thing, except that the 1 or 2 that do go with him are often enough to put in significant damage. And the threat of being grabbed just escalates as the game continues. People don't ward, people don't track where the support is roaming, or think about who could be behind a wall near an objective. And the longer the game goes, the longer the death timers get. It doesn't matter how behind that Blitzcrank has gotten, that grab is still going to do the same thing at level 1 as it does at level 18. And one clutch pick is all it can take to change a game sometimes. Now, a few things hold Blitzcrank back from being further up this list, and so low elo supports are generally terrible, they roam at the wrong times, they don't ward properly, and that's an important part of the role that Blitzcrank players are no better at than others. B, I don't think many people actually main Blitzcrank. Most Blitzcrank players, I bet you find, are people who are on a bit of a losing streak. They've given up on the sexy, cool, fun to play supports, and they're so desperate to win a game that they're willing to put up with the torrents of abuse for potentially missing their grabs, to put their fate in the hands of chance and just go for it. Take the pot shot and see if they luck out. Because whilst low elo players are terrible with skill shots, low elo players are also terrible at dodging skill shots. So from here on out, isn't it interesting the champions we're talking about are all mid laners or junglers? So despite the fact that support is a highly impactful role, at the end of the day the support needs their team to follow up on their plays and put out the damage that will take them over the line. So yes, if a support is popping off, then that probably means their bot, mid, jungler, some combination of them are too. That's not necessarily true, and if they're not, if the support is on its own, then they don't matter. Jungle and mid, however, have the best access to all the other lanes and therefore the ability to influence them. The mid laner has more direct control over the fortunes of their opposite. It's more zero-sum in that if one mid laner is ahead, then the other is usually behind, which is more or less a direct one-up for one particular team. Whereas in jungle, that relationship between how powerful one jungler is versus the other is a little bit looser. They tend to have less direct impact on a single lane, but can more flexibly choose to apply themselves around to multiple different lanes, and also obviously have greater responsibility for objective control. Both roles strongly affect what the other can achieve, and there's quite a lot of synergy between them. So in this middle block, we've got the scary mid lane assassins. Akali can top lane, and Zed can now jungle, but really they're strongest in mid lane. Akali struggles with some of the more chunky top lane characters, and Zed doesn't have CC to help him set up ganks, and is an assassin, and assassins need to be ahead to be really effective, and that's less reliable in jungle because of the experience and gold deficit compared to top and mid lanes. All three of them are hypermobile and can put out some truly eye-watering damage. They're difficult to play, which counts against them, but they are extremely popular because they're cool and sexy, and people are willing to put a large amount of time into them. Although some portion of the player base are going to be those wannabe noobs, and you can tell which ones those are because they're on your team, people playing them in ranked, particularly, kind of mid to high silver up, tend to have enough experience and control to actually be quite dangerous. And I suspect many of them could actually be a whole rank higher if they would only stoop to playing easier champions. As it is, they're often a bit like the big kids that got held back a year in school, and they run around marvelling at how much better they are than these other children, as they run rings and do flashy dashes and cool kills until they slip up, throw their shut down, lose the game and flame their team for not being good enough. Yeah, it seems like an unusually high number of people who play these champions have quite a toxic attitude and a hair-trigger anger. And that probably stems from a long time of feeling better than the other players in their elo, and yet not being able to climb out of it. Quite apart from the experience of playing with sometimes unpleasant people is the experience of playing against them. They're short-ranged and have long, important cooldowns, and then it just feels like they walk over to the idiot bot lane and get a double kill, or just like the jungler comes and tries to force something and they die in a stupid way, and that gets them ahead, and now they're 100 to 0ing fools all over the place. And obviously CC is the answer. But they've got so many blinks, dashes, invisibilities that most of us average Joes, particularly those of us that have never played these champions, just don't have a clue where they're going to be and struggle to keep up. So yeah, you dread to see these champions in a draft because you're going to have to spend the game putting up with their attitude. If they get a whiff of a few kills, they tend to demolish your whole team. So as junglers, our job is usually to babysit them in lane and try to get them fed, or camp them if they're on the enemy team, and try to get them to rage quit the game. If you're in the side lanes, your job is to pay attention to, when they disappear from the map, where are they on the map, and make sure you just don't die to them. Be wary of handshaking river skirmishes, that sort of thing. Easier said than done, obviously. So now we're in with the big boys. We've reached the top 3, and it's Kayn. I have such a love-hate relationship with Kayn, almost entirely hate. The love bit is the most satisfying thing in League for me is beating a Kayn. Gosh, it feels good to see his body lying broken there on the ground, with the lamentations of the Rast typing bitterly in chat. In low elo, everyone and their dog plays Kayn, and it's the dogs you've got to watch out for. Honestly, when I first started playing jungle, it was like every other game was against Kayn, or like back to back, Kayn. And I was playing things like Wukong and Rengar, and I just kept losing. And this season, in ranks where I've played almost exclusively Kindred, Kayn is my most faced opponent. And near the beginning of the season when I made this tier list, I still hadn't overcome my bugbear for him, and I would have banned him if it wasn't for the existence of Master Yi and Yuumi. But I am happy to report that at the current time I have a 66% win rate against him. Turns out if you keep playing against it, you eventually learn how to beat it. Or maybe he got nerfed and I haven't paid attention. Or maybe Kindred's just a good counter to him, which actually I think she is, and they keep counter-picking themselves anyway. So yeah, despite the fact he's extremely common, and despite the fact I'm actually quite successful against him, Kayn still triggers one of the strongest emotional reactions from me when I see him across in the draft. Previously it was one of, impotent frustration and boredom, but now it's actually excitement, because I can't wait to have a shot at wiping that smirk off his face. But why is Kayn so oppressive? And I think I would argue that he has one of the best kits for jungling, particularly in the chaos of solo queue. And it boils down to the fact that he can play as a farming and ganking jungler at the same time in the same game. He has the best of both worlds. If there aren't any opportunities, then he can just farm and get strong. If you can't see opportunities as Kayn, something's probably going wrong. Because he has the most versatile gank approaches in the entire game. Things like Rek'Sai and Shaco can achieve a better surprise factor, but Kayn is literally unlimited by terrain. And time after time after time, laners get caught out by it. And by the time they see that little glint on the wall, it's usually too late, and he can gap close and CC them and do the damage needed to take them out. And it is so hard to keep him down. He is like a turbo cockroach. Even if you counter jungle him, he can move across the map so quickly. He can like to respond and take your camps as well, so you don't set him behind, or he just flows straight into ganks and gets kills. It barely slows him down. You get into fights with him and it just helps him get to his form quicker. And it's often said that Kayn is weaker early game, and that's a bit misleading because that implies that he is weak early game. He is one of the fastest clears in the game. He can do it leashless and can start red, blue or raptors. He can move around the jungle virtually unimpeded, quicker than I think any other character in the game can, maybe Talon. And Baby Kayn is just an average fighter. He can't match the dedicated early game junglers, but he isn't horrible in like a quick and dirty skirmish over Scuttle, which he actually gets quite a bit out of because, as I said, he gets his little orbs for his form, and he can, he moves more quickly than other junglers, so he can get back to his camps and get away if things look unfavourable more quickly than his opponent. A champion that can full clear by 315 and be ganking a level 3 laner is not weak early. I'm not saying Kayn is easy to play. I suspect he takes quite a bit of experience and skill to make work effectively, and that's why you see so many bad ones. And I suspect with the better ones there's a bit of that elo deflation going on, like we talked about with the 3 assassins, which is why the players tend to be so butthurt and perpetually toxic. But once they hit the mid game and have gotten their red form finally, it doesn't matter if they're the good type of player or the bad type of player, they're gonna be a problem and take up space. Because Red Kayn, or Rast, is an anti-tank, anti-squishy brawler that has no difficulty getting access to his opponents because he can walk through fucking walls, and has a whacking great scythe to give him extended range. Not to mention knock-up CC. The fucker has so much durability from his lifesteal and his ability to go untargetable through walls and inside his victims, which gives him time to get all his cooldowns back. So when he does finally rip himself out and potentially kill someone, he's got opportunity to just escape, slip back into the walls, or continue his rampage. This fucking parasite is so easily capable of just going in 1v5, killing some people, and just getting away with it. Not giving up his shutdown, luring the survivors into a trap. He can just fucking drive-by snipe objectives, just, swimming through a wall next to the Baron or the Dragon, and just go, smite, thank you, at lower risk than virtually anyone else in the game. If you're interested, the main counter to Rast is buying Grievous Wounds, and letting him overcommit on your teammates whilst you, the smart player, position to focus him down. Delaying his ability to get to his Rast form pays off massively, as Kayn's are used to being massively over-leveled from all the farm and kills they get, and will overestimate their abilities if a bit behind. The best way to do this, I found, is by counter-ganking them, and then taking their jungle. If for some reason Kayn decides to go his blue form, you can breathe out a bit of a sigh of relief. Because even though in low elo you tend to get teams full of squishy, cool champions that Blue Kayn is really good into, supposedly, he's nowhere near as durable as Rast, and so will end up dying and giving a shutdown in a completely normal way that the game is balanced around dealing with. You can usually tell which Kayn he's going to go by his runes. If he takes Conqueror, he's going Rast. If he takes like Dark Harvest or Electrocute, he's probably going Blue Kayn. You can also look at your team. If it's full of long-range champions, then he's more likely to get his blue form because he's more likely to pick up those blue orbs. If you're mostly melee champions, it's more likely to be Rast. So it's like a gremlin with water. If you can possibly keep him away from your melees, so much the better. So there we go, that's Kayn. Bullshit by concept. So now we get to the number 2 slot. And a bit controversial maybe, I've put Sylas here. And I'm maybe starting to second guess myself. Do I really hate to see him more than Kayn or Katarina? I'm not sure. I could be persuaded to put him a bit lower, but for the sake of not having to change my little graphic, I'm going to own it for this video. Okay, so why does Sylas elicit such a groan, number 2 level groan, when I see him in the draft? I think it ultimately boils down to the fact that Sylas players are generally just hard to beat. Sylas skirmishes and outplays incredibly well. He's got great dynamic movement abilities with his E, effectively being a double dash, as well as a short stun, and his W is an incredible gotcha. You think you finally got him, and then he just turns the tables on you, hits you with Kingslayer, and now you've lost all your health and he's got it back. His signature ult is to steal other people's ults, and if you've played any sort of tactical game, you will appreciate how strong the ability to copy other players' abilities is. Essentially because you have access to an ability that you shouldn't have access to in a position where it's not expected to be. And there are a ton of amazing ults for Sylas out there. Alistar's ult, Shen's ult, Echo's ult, Malphite's ult, Ashe's ult, Diana's ult, Kennen's ult, fucking Amumu's ult. There are obviously less useful ones, but with a bit of imagination you'd be surprised what he can do. And I think a lot of my frustration with Sylas comes from the fact that I used to think he was like a weak early game champion that then scaled really strong. And I'd get frustrated, like, why do my laners keep losing to this thing when he's supposed to be weak, and then he's up my ass for the rest of the game, constantly pressuring the river, forcing me off objectives and roaming bot for double kills. And after playing around with him a bit myself recently, I've started to appreciate a bit more what he's about. He is mechanically quite demanding to play, but it's not as hard as I thought. And actually, he's not as weak early on as I thought. If you can avoid getting poked out in levels 1 and 2, he's actually got decent dueling, and obviously he's a really good skirmisher. So like when he's got someone else to play off of and augment his damage just a bit, or give him just a little bit more time to get his cooldowns back, he's actually surprisingly strong. He can do similar sort of things to Akali and Katarina and Zed, but he's just a bit more robust. There's a bit more of a brawler about him, which fits low elo a bit better. And honestly, if you're good at Sylas, I don't think there's any champion on the Rift that you fear. The outplay potential is really top notch, and yeah, honestly, if he hadn't been gutted from jungle, I would be seriously looking at him as an AP option. I mean, he still can sort of jungle, but I think you really have to love him rather than the role. So yeah, respect to Sylas, it's a fucking dangerous champion. So finally, we come to the head honcho, number 1 champion I do not want to see in my games. And there is no controversy, there is no doubt. I ban this champion every game because it is a cancer. And if I can't ban it, I ban Yuumi. Because neither of those champions fundamentally deserve to be in the game. So Master Yi is a notorious low elo stomper assassin. Lots of these content creators like to sound cool and say, well, Yi's not a problem, I don't have a problem with Yi, just CC him and kill him and it's fine. But I think the fact that he consistently has amongst the highest ban rates in the game, along with Darius and Zed, like 30% player base ban him, season after season after season, you have to admit it's a good sign that there's possibly something wrong with this champion. So what is it about him that makes him so bad? Well, we could just purely look at his kit and say, well, his R allows him to run really fast, which allows him to kind of gap close or chase people down. His Q allows him to really gap close, invulnerably, untargetably, at a decent range for a melee only champion. And with his passive and his items, 1, 2, 3, you're dead. He's got his reset, he's off doing it to someone else. And you're stuffed because, just CC him, bro. Well, all your guys with skill shots that stun, fired them off as he went and untargetable. And now all you can do is watch as he blinks between each of your teammates, turning them into salami, and they just can't escape. You can't build resistances against him because he does true damage. And then the final kick in the nuts is that he actually can be surprisingly resilient with his meditate, which he can use to absorb damage burst or kind of just wait out, delay for his cooldowns to come back up or for his team to come and support him. And the difficulty of hitting him, not because he's, being really skillful and moving around well, but because he's literally pressed a button that means you can't hit him, and then appearing to do 1 billion damage and get a pentakill, It's really just the same, or much of muchness, with Akali and Katarina and Zed, why those champions are so bullshit. But what sets him a bit more apart is his scaling across the game. So like he is one of the best scaling champions in the game. I sort of have a little joke that, Yi will win by default. He is the house. He will win by default, so long as the game goes on long enough. The other assassins rely on being, ahead, over-leveled, kind of having item advantages over their opponents to be able to get their burst damage to delete opponents, in a quick enough time frame. As the game gets later, people get more chunky, more robust, their defenses get better, and so they start to fall off. Yi doesn't, and not to mention he shreds waves and towers of champions like anything with equal ease. Tanks traditionally counter assassins, they don't counter Yi. Yi counters them. Okay, with that strong a late game, he probably has a really shit early game. Not true. In the first few levels, Yi is actually capable of winning duels with most other junglers. So you have to be really careful if you want to try to invade him to put him behind, and usually it's not worth it, and it's more worth going to attack his laners and trying to out-tempo his relatively average clear speed. He tends not to gank much early, not because he can't, his ganks aren't the best in the entire world, but they're serviceable. But for Yi, the risks just generally aren't worth it unless the gank is totally free. Because as a farming jungler, all he wants to do is hit his a certain power level, and he can then ruffle stomp the game. And that can happily be done by farming minions for 20 minutes. And that's all frustrating enough, but really it's not anything that out of the ordinary for these sort of douchebag tier champs. What truly sets Yi apart, and why I ban him every game, is the fact that Yi's playstyle specifically means that no one else in the game is having fun but Yi. And even then, I suspect they're not having that much fun most of the time. Because unlike Yi, the other obnoxious assassins play in mid lane. And despite their attitude, they actively want to work with their jungler to, set up kills in lane, or go to river skirmishes and fights, or head to bot lane to get double kills. It's impacting their jungler, it's impacting their bot lane, maybe their top lane. They're interacting with their other lanes to help take pressure off them. It's all to stroke their ego, but it has the side effect of having some sort of semblance of teamwork. If we look at Kayn, on the other hand, Kayn is a jungler, and whatever else you might think of him or the people that play him, he is very active on the map most of the time. But what does Yi do? He takes the most unfun aspects of the assassins and sticks it in an AFK farm bot. He demands that his laners take all the pressure to defend him, whilst he gives them nothing back in return. And they either can't take the pressure, the team collapses and they lose the game, or Yi just eventually strolls out of the jungle, kills everyone and wins the game by himself. Incredibly dissatisfying for players, in the lanes that have been struggling for 30 fucking minutes. And pretty unpleasant for the enemy who felt like they were doing well and then just lost. Because some tit who'd done virtually nothing up to that point decided that it was time for him to win. And I just find this style of play so unhealthy for the community of the game. It's understandable that laners are gonna flame and be like, I've been ganked 3 times already, please just do something. And then he's like, I'm trying to win you the game, why can't you just suck it up for just a little bit longer? OMG, my team's so bad. So yeah, the reason why I ban Yi every game, the reason why he's at the top of this list is not because he's OP, unbeatable, super broken. It's because a game without Yi in it is in every way a better game. And if I can't ban Yi because someone else has picked or banned him, I ban Yuumi. Not because she's super broken or I find her really hard to play against, but because I don't want someone who's going to put in that little effort in one of my games. And if I can't ban either of them, then I just ask my team who they like to ban, because honestly, I probably then wouldn't ban anyone. Not even Kayn. Because ultimately, even if I see a team that's like Darius, Kayn, Akali, Vayne, Blitzcrank, and I go, oh, this is gonna be rough, I'm still going to play it because I want to learn how to beat them. And at the end of the day, playing the game with all these different champions is just fun. So there we go, that's my tier list. I hope it was interesting to see another person's thoughts. And I will catch you on the next one. Take care.